Welcome back to another episode of Rock Boys Football. Shane Beamer, the South Carolina Gamecocks, on a Thursday afternoon seem to be making a run at what I think might be certainly one of, arguably the best overall player currently in the spring transfer portal window. That is North Carolina edge rusher Beau Atkinson. Now, look, I get it, and we've talked about it a lot. Shane Beamer has taken the strategy that we're going to use our NIL resources to retain our talent. And you saw South Carolina, hey, when the player in fit was right for a guy like Rasul Faison, South Carolina will get aggressive to add players that they need. But it's generally the approach of, hey, we want to make sure we're keeping the bulk of our young talent together, and we're not going to get into bidding wars for players in the transfer portal. This is one of those players that, one, I think is a phenomenal football player. We'll talk a little bit more about him, and at a position that Shane Beamer has publicly, talked about wanting to address in the spring transfer portal window. I don't think you're going to see many of these players kind of enter in the spring. If I'm South Carolina and Shane Beamer, I know I historically have not gotten into many crazy bidding wars for. This might be a player that I want to consider pushing my chips into the middle of the table and trying to land going into 2025. I think he can be a legitimate difference maker for South Carolina on the defensive line, and you bring him in. Dylan Stewart, Beau Atkinson, to me, it might be one of the better edge rusher duos that you see in the SEC. And if we're talking about South Carolina trying to maintain that dominance that we saw on the defensive side of the football in 2024, I think it starts with stopping the run and getting after the passer. Beau Atkinson will help you in a big-time way in both of those categories. Want to get into Beau Atkinson first, a guy that I have, for lack of better terms, fallen in love with after watching him late last night. Want to talk Beau Atkinson. Want to talk about a couple other names that either South Carolina has reached out to or I think they should pursue. Now, before we get into it, as always, to the South Carolina fans, appreciate you guys. It's going to be a really fun next couple of days, right? We got the spring game going on Friday night. We clearly see Shane Beamer starting to make some moves in the transfer portal. Appreciate you guys rocking with it. A lot of the South Carolina fans, y'all been rocking with the fellas for a long time. Appreciate you guys. If y'all do enjoy the content, consider subscribing to the channel. Without further ado, let's get into it now. Y'all can probably tell in terms of how I opened this one. I really like Beau Atkinson. Played 389 snaps for North Carolina last year, 11 tackles for a loss, 7 sacks. What stands out to me, and it's something you can't really ignore. Very similar athletic profile, very similar play style, and quite frankly, very similar production in the ACC to Kyle Kennard last year. I mean, these guys play the sport the same way. And if you were South Carolina, yes, you have to be competitive in the NIL landscape here. This is another one where, hey, you show what Kyle Kennard did in his final year of eligibility at South Carolina, and you are saying, hey, that can be you in the 2025 year. Now, what stands out to me the most about Beau Atkinson is he's really good against the run. And that's probably the main concern for a lot of South Carolina fans heading into 2025, right? We replace a lot of really good football players in the front seven, not only on the defensive line, but at the off-ball linebacker position as well. I think the pass rush with or without Beau Atkinson should be pretty good for South Carolina. When you have a guy like Dylan Stewart, you're probably not going to have all that much of an issue rushing off the edge, or at least rushing the passer. I think my bigger concern is, hey, can we be as good against the run as we were last year? Because you look at South Carolina and all the success they had getting after the passer, it started by stopping the run on first and second down. Setting these opposing offenses up in those third and long situations where Kyle Kennard and Dylan Stewart could get after the passer. Beau Atkinson, 17 run stops last year, 11 tackles for loss. He is a heavy-handed edge rusher that not only can get after the passer, but he's very, very good against the run. And so he's not only giving you more depth at that edge position, but he's also adding a massive asset for South Carolina potentially in terms of stopping the run. This one makes a ton of sense. And he's a guy that, as a football player, you turn on the film, one, really, really strong kid that has no problem taking on and getting off blocks. That's what you see in the run game. And then as a pass rusher, hey, you can go speed to power with that length and just put tackles right into the lap of the quarterback. He's also got some really intriguing twitch and burst and bendability to win outside the shoulder of offensive tackles too. He's a all-encompassing guy. And I think you look at it and say, this is a position of need for South Carolina. This is, in my opinion, the best edge defender that we are going to see in the spring transfer portal window. This is one of those guys that, hey, if I'm Shane Beamer, I'm very strongly considering pushing my chips into the middle of the table and going out and getting going into 2025. Another name that I think is worth mentioning, another North Carolina defender, Joel Starlings. To the South Carolina fans who follow the recruiting trail pretty closely, this is probably a familiar name. You know, South Carolina went after him in the 2023 cycle. Now, not as good of a football player right now as Beau Atkinson, but I think the thing that stands out to every South Carolina fan listening to this is, hey, we need more of these kind of bodies. You know, hasn't really been a difference maker or played a ton of football for North Carolina during his first 2 years. Now he's going into year 3. Was expected to be a guy for North Carolina going into the 2025 year, now hitting the portal. How many body types and players like Joe Starlings are going to be available in the spring transfer portal window for South Carolina? I'm not sure if the number is going to be that many. This is a guy that you have a relationship with from the high school recruiting trail. This one would probably make a lot of sense too, and probably go a long way in terms of shoring up the depth in the middle of that defensive line. And so far, we haven't seen a legitimate difference maker emerge at this position in the portal. I would like to see South Carolina go after that difference maker if they do emerge. But you also got to worry about depth. And I think Joe Starlings is a guy you can bring in, big body in the middle of that defensive line that gives you the adequate depth you're going to need to play in the SEC in 2025. Another position that I think is worth mentioning here is off-ball linebacker. Now, I do think that if you're a South Carolina fan, and what we're kind of hearing from the program is we feel pretty good about the linebackers we have on this roster. I mean, you take a look at this depth chart real quick. We've heard good things from Fred Johnson. We've heard good things from Justin O. We've heard good things from Sean Murphy. You know, all guys that have that desired athletic profile, but guys that are not necessarily proven commodities at the off-ball linebacker position. Gary Bryant probably certainly does not offer the upside of a guy like Fred Johnson, but a guy that played a lot of football for South Dakota at the FCS ranks in the 2024 year. I haven't watched a ton of them, but from what I have seen, the thing I love the most, he just knows what he's doing out there. Look, you don't get 100 plus tackles in a year on accident. He knows how to pick through traffic. He knows how to find the football. That's kind of what we're looking for South Carolina. You know, we know we got the guys. Do we have enough guys that know what they're doing yet going into 2025? Gary Bryant, to me, would just make you feel better about the linebacker position and the proven production that you have going into 2025. And then I think the last position is probably wide receiver, right? And it's not a glaring concern because we've heard exceptional things from Nick Harbor during spring. We've heard very good things from the freshmen coming into this program. I don't think it's nearly a concern that many of us thought it would be heading into spring. But you still look at the room and say, if there does happen to be an intriguing wide receiver that can add some experience to this room, maybe we'll go out and pursue. Trebor Pena, the price tag might be a little high. And I could certainly see Shane Beamer saying, hey, we're just going to rock with the guys we've recruited out of high school. But if the money makes sense, this would make a lot of sense for South Carolina for a couple of different reasons. But I think most importantly, this is a 6-year senior that's coming off a season where he caught for over 900 yards, had over 108 targets, elite slot wide receiver in terms of separation. Then you look at the jump that we want to see from Lenore Sellers. Hey, just taking what's there, being in a little bit more better command of the offense, being a little bit more of an efficient quarterback. We know Lenore Sellers can be explosive. If he takes a step in terms of the efficiency, that's when you're looking at the best quarterback in the country. I think Trebor Pena would mean worlds to Lenore Sellers, kind of taking that efficiency step in the 2025 year. Not the biggest, not the fastest. Reminds you a lot of Xavier Restrepo at the Miami Hurricanes last year. A guy that you know is going to get open. Like 3rd and 4, the ball's going to Trebor Pena because he's going to create separation or sit it down in zone coverage and be presentable to the quarterback. This would be a guy that I think would make sense for South Carolina. Last name that I think is just intriguing, and I would be very surprised if South Carolina becomes a player, but I want to shout him out, as Hakeem Williams. Former 5-star wide receiver, has dealt with injuries, hasn't really developed the way we were all expecting at Florida State. He hits the transfer portal this morning. What does Lenore Sellers do best as a quarterback? Where did South Carolina have a ton of success last year? Big bodies pushing the ball down the field. Lenore Sellers likes throwing the deep ball, and he can push it down the field. Do we have enough wide receivers that we think can be big bodies that work vertically down the field? I think you have one with Nick Harbor. Do we have anyone else? You feel good about potentially Donovan Murphy as a freshman or Malik Clark, maybe Hakeem Williams. If it works out for both sides. But this is probably a guy you probably want to do your due diligence on. Beau Atkinson, though, to me, you already know I'm high on South Carolina. You add Beau Atkinson, that's a transfer portal addition that to me, and I know I'm kind of being a little hyperbolic here, that's a guy that changes how I look at South Carolina going into 2025. I think he is worth Shane Beamer really getting aggressive for. We're going to see how that plays out over the next couple of days. They're getting on a Zoom call this afternoon. Appreciate you guys rocking with it. If y'all do enjoy the content, consider subscribing to the channel, and we'll talk to y'all later. Peace.